My name is Abby Chan, and I'm a registered dietitian with my master's in nutrition and dietetics from Arizona State University. Today, we are going to go through understanding nutritional competencies and what that means so that you can actually start to change the way that you eat by taking a step by step process so that you don't get caught in the weeds in fad diets or other um, things that you may find that are trending in the media. So, with that caveat, I want to just mention first that whether it's now or in the future, I always encourage you to look at where you're getting your nutritional information from. You should always make sure that you are getting your nutritional information from a credentialed individual who is a registered dietitian. Or registered dietitian nutritionist. If that RD or registered dietitian is not attached to that nutritionist, and they are just either a nutrition coach or a nutritionist or even sometimes MDs, um, they may not actually have the background or ability to understand of how to actually apply nutrition information in a sense that makes sense for the vast amount of individuals, with taking into consideration overall nutritional needs as well as the psychology behind nutrition, and just to make sure it's balanced overall in an applicable and sustainable way. So the objectives of this presentation today is to understand what defines health, understand the nutritional hierarchy and competencies, understand macronutrients and balance, as well as understand how to create change. So first of all, let's just think about, I want you to think about, maybe even just close your eyes and think about what is health or healthy. I want you to first just think about what are some images or ideas or thoughts that may come to your mind. Maybe it could even be pictures of what healthy people do, um, what that would look like overall, of maybe what types of activities they do, what types of foods they eat, other activities around maybe community too, of understanding that it could look like a lot of different things. So now that you have that picture, I really want to go through and define health. And so health or healthy is technically defined as being free of disease or disease. It encompasses physical health, which is cardiovascular, pulmonary, sexual, gastrointestinal, and physical health, as well as mental health too. So know that when we talk about health, it can look like a lot of different things. And what most people think of when we look at health, it could just be maybe how someone eats. When maybe that picture that you created in your mind was maybe just how someone eats, or how they exercise, or what they do for exercise, or maybe even what they look like. And I really want to start to reframe and take some of those ideas and pictures out of the picture and really start to look at what are the healthy behaviors that are going to promote health, not what does healthy look like. Because a lot of times, if we start to just think about what healthy looks like, it doesn't really matter what it looks like. It looks like it more matters of what those individuals' behaviors are over time. So, healthy behaviors include eating, which is what we're going to talk about today. It includes sleeping. So, do you get adequate sleep? Do you at least sleep 7 to 9 hours a night? And if not, if you're either getting not enough of that, that can have major physical health complications in the sense of lack of recovery, especially if someone is pretty active in their day. It's going to have a huge hormonal response too, which is then also going to impact overall chronic disease and illness, such as heart disease, diabetes, and other types of metabolic conditions as well. So sleep is huge. So to me, if you're not sleeping at least 7 to 9 hours, then that's definitely something that needs to be addressed and worked on. Another thing that would be a healthy behavior is moving. So moving your body throughout the day, and as well as getting a balance of cardiovascular exercise and movement and strength movement throughout your day and throughout your week. So that's really important when we look at the exercise recommendations, which are about 150 minutes of moderate activity per week for adults, as well as 2 days of a strength based program and moving throughout your day. So, not just getting your workout in and then sitting for the rest of the day, but also getting up, moving around, maybe going for a walk. These are things that we often call or refer to as activities of daily living, watering the garden, etc., etc. Another healthy behavior is connecting with yourself and also with your community. So, what does your social circle look like? Do you have a good idea of what you need to do to connect in with yourself? Do you have a daily practice that is maybe somewhat of a mindfulness practice, or I like to call it a self keeping practice of what are those things that help keep you balanced and quote unquote sane, so you're not yelling at someone in traffic or something like that. So it's not to the point to where you have to manage your hashtag self-care plan, where it's basically you stress yourself out so much that you have to take an entire day off to go just like take care of yourself and sit in a corner and veg. So that is not necessarily connecting. That's running yourself ragged and then having to rest. And so we need to look at how do we actually connect in with ourselves on a daily basis so we can listen into what we need, as well as how do we connect in with our community socially. And then the last thing is recovering. So this is very all encompassing in the sense of do you sleep enough? Do you, if you're an athlete, do you look at how you're recovering? Do you have rest days in your week if you do a lot of physical activity? And then also, if you're someone who socially exerts themselves a lot, or again, just has that self care plan, but not self keeping plan, how do we look at your overall recovery mentally, physically, and emotionally? So, all of those things are healthy behaviors. So, eating, which we're talking about today, sleeping 7 to 9 hours, moving your body throughout the day, as well as getting cardiovascular and strength activity, connecting with others and yourself, and then recovering overall. So, here's a fact for you: nutrition is hyper polarized. So, the issue I think with a lot of nutrition recommendations or guidelines is that they're rules and regulations, but we're not taught the rationale or the how to behind it. This has led to a growth of an industry who are trying, and individuals who are trying to capitalize off of our lack of knowledge and self efficacy, which means our ability to feel like we can make change and help ourselves. And this has led to confusing messaging from the diet industry and diet culture in general, which means that without these guidelines and without this rationale, that's where a lot of this where a lot of these fads get to come in, because it's the keto, it's the low fat, it's the high carb, it's the low carb, it's intermittent fasting, and then it's plant based, and all of this is really really confusing. And I want you just to know that, first of all, that the entire industrial complex is a $72.7 billion industry. So know that because there's so much money involved in it, that your best interest is not their best interest. So their best, or what they have in mind, is their bottom line, right? So their goal is to try to get you onto some keto thing and buy all the products, do all the things, get off of it, quote unquote, fail on it, and then start something new. And when you actually look at the data and the research, 95% of dieters fail, and normally two-thirds of dieters will regain the weight that they lost, and oftentimes they will regain even more weight. And this is because of our physiology. So, human physiology, if we were to think back to our ancestors, we never had the time or ability to think about keto or intermittent fasting or all of these things. It was more like, do I have enough food, and can I acquire that? So really, when we look at our physiology, anytime we put ourselves on something that's hyper restricted, what our physiology and our body thinks is happening is that we're actually dying, that we are in our body doesn't understand that we are in a readily available food environment where we could maybe turn the corner if you're working from home and go into your pantry and grab something, or go down the street and food is everywhere. So our body doesn't understand that. And so what it just understands is that it thinks that we are in a famine, so we are starving. And then its main goal eventually, once we run out of quote unquote willpower, or just can't do it anymore, or a life event comes up like a birthday or an anniversary, once something comes up, then our physiology is like, well, we are now in a feast, so we should take in as much as we can at one time. And so this will often lead to a restrict and binge type pattern, which also from our physiology can lead to an issue with when we look at the overall impact on our physiology and the metabolic implications that dieting has is that oftentimes when we lose weight, we are we actually end up burning less calories and energy at rest, which therefore when we regain that weight, our body's like, well, okay, I'm just gonna hold on to this. And then when we regain that weight, that how much we are burning at rest does not necessarily move up. And if we do that years over years over years, we are our metabolic rate is in a rate that is most likely of something of a small child, when we may need to be putting out a lot more energy than that. So know that overall diets don't work. And I'm here to help you understand how does this impact you, and then how do we start to educate you so that you feel like you can navigate this world a little bit more for yourself. And I just like to make a caveat that I'm a nutrition agnostic. There's never a one size fits all anything for anyone. So I think that's an important thing to recognize going forward. So, when we look at our nutritional needs and competencies, I've made this pyramid and created this pyramid that goes through, if we have to start, we can't ever start or build something from the bottom down. It doesn't work that way. If we tried to build a house from the roof and the landscaping first, we would be missing out on that foundational principles and foundation that we need to keep it upright. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So when we look at our competencies and needs, 99.99% of all nutrition information you will find on the internet, on the news, or through your social media is all of this fancy stuff that is really, really a very, very small part of what actually matters overall. So let's first talk about the step one of how do we build the base of this pyramid. And I think this is really important to talk about now, in a time of possible an increase of food insecurity, or not having enough food or not knowing where your next meal may be coming from. I think this is really important to think about in COVID times of do we have the mental ability and financial ability to acquire food. So are you financially insecure, or do you have a history of food insecurity? So was there a time in your life where you may have not known where that meal was coming from, even if you're in a food secure place now? Food insecurity can lead to a scarcity mentality around food, which, when we look at the research, increases the incidence of binge eating or overeating, which is basically eating more than an average amount that you would eat in one meal. If it's a binge, there is a technical definition of that, but it's basically eating a large amount of calories or energy in one sitting, possibly a day's worth at one time. So, another way that we can also put ourselves into this food scarcity idea or feeling or mindset is again through those extreme diets of if we are taking in very, very minimal amounts of calories, or on an extreme diet of, say, even take, if anyone's ever heard of HCG before, HCG is a diet where you take a hormonal shot, and then you're on an 800 calorie diet. When we actually think about overall the needs throughout the human lifespan, is that really a toddler needs about 1,200 calories a day. So if you're an adult and you're having 1,200 calories a day, that is not enough. And so a lot of times when we look at Noom or Weight Watchers or things like that, they are these heavily restricted diets, that may not actually be appropriate for the average individual and may actually lead to a food scarcity mindset, which then leads to a binging or overeating effect once you are either not on that diet anymore or when you have a quote unquote cheat day. So I like to think of, first of all, can we acquire food? So, do we have the financial ability? And then also, do you know how to go to the grocery store? Do you know how to plan meals? Or are you every single day lunch or dinner's rolling around and you're like, what are we going to eat? If that happens every single day, then I would say that you may not have that competency yet where you can acquire food. So, meal planning does not look like having to pre cook everything and have everything in this really tidy idea. But really, to me, meal planning is more of like, do we have 4 or 5 meals out of the week that we can cook effectively and efficiently, that it's not like we have to recreate the wheel every time? Also, acquiring food, do you know how to make lists, or do you know where to get consistent food if you're not at the grocery store or at home? Like, do you know places where you can get healthful foods, that are, granted, fast food is not always bad, but do you know how to get healthful foods that are overall going to help improve your health on a daily basis, as opposed to maybe not? So An example would be of a inability to acquire food would be a full-time parent who is running around with their kids, who's maybe shuttling them to different sports or right now homeschooling them and trying to get everything figured out, and planning quick meals or having healthiest options when on the go. So, do you have access to healthy snacks for maybe the family? Do you have access to a few places that may be quick, but do you know where to get like a quick salad or a quick healthful burrito that may have some vegetables in it, things like that. Also, another example for adults who I often find who have issues acquiring food, and this is not as much during COVID, but it's for those who travel for work often. So, do you find yourself on the road for days at a time out of the month? And if so, do you know how to acquire food, or is it always like you're scrounging for something? So, first of all, are you financially secure? If you're financially insecure, there's a lot of community resources. There's a COVID-19 Flagstaff community resource page on the Coconino County Health Department page, which is a great, great resource for food boxes, food pantries, if you find yourself in that scenario. So, that is acquiring food. So, can you acquire financially and then also physically and know how to navigate that without always scrambling for something? So then we need to look at, do you have enough? Do you have enough calories and energy that you're able to, and are you able to understand physically, when am I hungry? When am I full? And when can I be done with food? So, hunger and fullness, and understanding that, especially if you've been on a lot of different diets, is really hard to understand sometimes. Some people are like, I'm just never hungry, or some people are hungry all the time. And sometimes, if we end up getting too hungry, by the time it actually gets to the point of where we are ready to eat or have the ability to eat, we end up overeating because we were in this very, very ravenous state. So, enough to me is generally, do you have three consistent meals a day and possibly a snack or two? And are you able to understand when you may need to get that snack? And are you able to understand when you are full without making yourself overly full, by just maybe eating one or two meals a day and being overly full and then lethargic and tired, and then thinking of the emotional side of then possibly does guilt set in at that point too, of like, I shouldn't have done that, I don't feel as good, etc., etc. So we need enough energy and calories in order to address our basic needs, to fuel our brain, to fuel our bodies for basic movement. But then also, if you also have a movement practice on top of that, it's important to be able to fuel that as well. So the human body has evolved for thousands of years to survive. We are built to survive. And um, our bodies, again, don't understand dieting. And if we were ever in that calorie deficit, our body thought we were in a famine. So it's really important to make sure we can make ourselves feel metabolically secure by having enough food. And also, if we don't have enough food, what we're doing is we're putting our bodies and our physiology in a stressed out or sympathetic state. And in that stressed out state, which we can also refer to as our fight, flight, or freeze, the opposite of that would be our parasympathetic state, which is where it's our rest, digest, and heal. And so when we are only in this sympathetic state or stressed out state, it's really, really hard for our bodies to feel like they can make change and recover and rest and maybe feel like they have enough food so that it's not always looking around the corner of when's the next famine. And also remembering that stress is stress. Our bodies doesn't understand, oh, this is work stress, or this is exercise stress, or this is this stress. It can't put them in those really pretty boxes. So it's important to just look at a little bit more of just, are we stressed or are we able to rest and calm down? And noting right now that there's a lot of stressful things in life, such as the global pandemic, maybe trying to manage working from home, possibly homeschooling, family, not being able to see family, health conditions. Again, workouts and exercise is a stress on the body. So, yes, it's a quote unquote good stressor, but sometimes too much of a good thing is not always a good thing. So, do we have enough time to bring ourselves back down into this rest, digest, and heal place by first of all giving ourselves enough energy? And so if we think about this, so big quiz time. If you're to think about this based on the two things I've already we've already covered. Should you go on a very low calorie diet or an extreme fast? So, since intermittent fasting has come up in the media recently, that can look like a lot of different things, but a lot of times it's a very short window of maybe 4 to 6 hours of eating and then fasting, so therefore not eating the rest of that time. So hopefully to that quiz you answered no, because not having enough food or going on this extreme fast can put your body in a stressed out state. This can also cause harm to normal bodily functions such as immunity, which is so important right now during COVID, to recovery and overall mental function as well. And I think when we think about fasting, of like, yes, there is some of the data is very interesting when we go to the research. There's a lot of promises. I still do think it shouldn't be a public health recommendation. But yeah, there are definitely times where our bodies should be fasted and shouldn't be eating, like when we're sleeping for those 7 to 9 hours, maybe a little bit more. Maybe there's some windows on either side of that where you're not eating. Because when we think about our body clock, so what we can refer to that as our circadian rhythm. So what wakes us up in the morning, what puts us to bed at night, and that's often regulated by our hormones and daylight. And if we are eating in a time when we're supposed to be sleeping, our body is not ready for that. Hormonally, it's not prepared for that. But also, if we are exerting ourselves really like to extremes during the day and we're not feeding our bodies, then we're actually starting to run into um, some a deficit there. So not having enough there. So it's important to eat when you're awake, not eat when it's nighttime, and especially if you're listening to this and you have a history of diabetes or metabolic disease or anything like that, if there is a reason why you should, not that you can't eat right before bed, but there should be a window of time that you are not eating all through the night. Okay, so now let's look at variety. So maybe you're sitting here thinking of like, yes, I can acquire food. Yes, I know how healthy restaurants or things I could grab on the go. I know how to pack snacks, and I know how to generally meal plan. And I know what enough is. I always eat 3 meals a day and possibly a snack if I need to. If you're telling me that you can do those things, great. Now let's talk about variety. So, variety is the ability to eat a variety of foods, not including intolerances or allergies to foods, but without getting into a guilt spiral about it. So, can you, and if we think to diets or things like that, so a lot of times it's like, I'm on a no carb or even a no sugar thing where you can do it for a little bit, but eventually our brains can actually only say no so many times until we run into this thing called decision fatigue, to where it's like, well, screw it, I'm going to have it. And then it goes into, again, that binge restrict cycle. And if we could just have a variety of foods all the time without having this one end of the spectrum to the other end of like, maybe we'll have a little bit of sugar every now and again. You probably won't eat a candy bar every single day, but could you maybe be okay with having a few squares of chocolate? Or can you have go to a birthday or have your birthday and enjoy a piece of cake without getting in a spiral about that too? So, can you eat a variety of different foods? And if we think about if you're on a keto or low carb or intermittent, insert whatever diet here, remember that date nights, birthday celebrations will always happen. And this is always why diets fail, because then people get into that black or white, all or nothing thinking, because we can only eat this very narrow window of quote unquote approved foods for so long, and then again, we get bored. And then if we get bored of foods, then you're more likely to think about those foods that you can't have. And then you're more likely to go through this binge restrict pattern overall. So it's just better if we can create an overall balance in the long run of, can you allow yourself to have these things? Probably not every day, but can you do that without feeling hyper guilty about it? And also do it in a way that's going to support overall health. Because when we actually think about food, food should, yes, feed us nutritionally, but it should also bring us pleasure and feed us emotionally and connect us to our community. So food plays a lot of different roles in our life. And that's another thing that diets, whether it be low carb or keto or something like that, they don't recognize the cultural impact of food and the need for food to serve many different purposes besides just this um, very transactional nutrient providing. So let's just look at this really quickly. So this is important to look at of what is this pattern? So restriction, I'm not eating sugar ever. Even if we think of this on a macro scale, we can think of this as the overall annual American year of I'm not eating sugar because this is the new year. I quote unquote fell off the wagon, et cetera, et cetera. So if we go to this restriction, we will then go to deprivation. And this is some of these feelings end up being feeling overly obsessed with food or overly hungry of I wish I could eat this. Oh, I wish I could eat right now. I wish I could eat lunch, but it's not lunchtime yet. Granted, we all have jobs or sometimes time constraints of when it may not be appropriate to eat, but it's not, this is maybe when you're intentionally not eating or listening to that internal hunger cue um, because some sort of other external like diet or something is telling you not to. Then we start to get obsessed with these foods. So we start to get obsessed with food, of imagining food. When are we going to be able to have this thing? Um, Say, I like to think of certain foods that we don't allow ourselves to have as sparkly unicorns. So say it's Skittles, for example, or some sort of candy. You say, I'm not going to eat this candy. And then all you think about is that candy. And all of a sudden it turns into this sparkly unicorn that keeps running around your head when really it's just a horse. So when we start to look at this binge pattern next, is eating more than usual, or some words that may go along with that are quote unquote giving in. Well, I already made this decision and I blew it, so screw it, right? I'm sure some of you guys have been there before, which then leads into that guilt and regret cycle. So binging and saying, screw it, whatever, I'm going to start again tomorrow, or getting really down on yourself of like, I can't do this, I don't have willpower, which therefore is going to then lead back to that restriction. So if we can just start to make it so that we can eat Skittles or candy every now and again, so that it's not this thing that our mind is obsessing about, but it's taking basically this costume off this horse and being like, oh, you're not a unicorn, you're just a horse, and I can have you when I want to, but I also know when I don't want to have you and when that wouldn't serve me. And I may not need to partake in that horse right now. So interesting to think about this restriction and binge pattern also when we think of just overall American culture and our holiday season of we have this basically 3 months from October, from the end of Halloween to New Year's, where it's sort of this big binge, right? Where people aren't on their diets. And then we go through this New Year's resolution phase where it's this like restriction, deprivation, go to the gym, work really hard. It's like, where do we find this balance just in between the two? So next we need to look at balance. So this is where we start to get into some somewhat fancy stuff. And so if you can honestly say to me that you can acquire food, you eat enough food, and you can allow yourself to eat a variety of foods without getting into a guilt spiral or in this binge restrict mode, now we can move on to balance. So do you actually know what balance is and how to balance a meal? Um, Most of my patients who come into my office, so let's just go through 101, like Nutrition 101. So carbohydrates are broken down for quick energy for your brain and your muscles to use. They are essential for gastrointestinal function because some carbohydrates, especially the ones listed here below, will have a lot of fiber in them. And fiber is really essential of keeping us regular and keeping our bowels moving. So if anyone here struggles with diarrhea or constipation or just not having regular bowel movements, then especially if you've been on a low carb diet, generally if we start to introduce carbs back in, we start to get that gastrointestinal system moving a little bit better. Uh, so carbs, think of them as energy. Think of them as something that our brains need and our muscles need. They're also really important for satiation. So that is basically, I like to think of carbs as they're the things that turn off the hunger switch. So if you've ever just had a salad, maybe it had some chicken on it, so a little bit of protein, but you didn't have anything else on the side, and you're still thinking about like I could really go for a cookie or chips or a piece of bread or something like that. If you're starting to think about that, then to me, you didn't turn off that hunger switch. Yes, you gave your body food, but you didn't turn off that switch. So giving yourself some carbs throughout the day consistently can be really helpful in putting that pause on food for a moment. So when we think about how much, It's generally about 2 to 3 handfuls of a carb per meal. So if we think about hands, I want you to hold out your hands in front of you right now, and cup your fingers together and think about maybe 2 handfuls per meal. So that could look like a russet potato. It could look like maybe a cup of beans. It could look like a 1 or 2 pieces of fruit, things like that. When we look at sugar, granted, it's not going to go into the handful category. Sugar is not going to be the worst thing in the world, but again, we should look at it. Can we have it in moderation? So when we're actually looking at sugar, is can we limit it so that maybe you're not eating a candy bar every day? That'd be a great place to start. And can we start to maybe just pay attention to added sugar content? For those of you in the NAPEP community know the sugar challenge, and it's just important to have that look at that added sugar content and make sure it's not going over that 25 to 35 grams per day, because then if it is, then you're not getting enough nutrients in from other foods as well. When we think about sugar, less is not always better. For those, when we look at the research, for those who go under that 25 grams of added sugar per day, it doesn't really give you that much more benefit. It doesn't really change anything. So kind of that threshold is a good place to start. And also, if you never ever allow yourself to have sugar, you will then again be in that binge restrict pattern. So just remember that. I think it's important to note what is added sugar. So added sugar is anything that has been added through the processing of that food. And I really like to take fruit juice, for example. So fruit juice, 100% fruit juice, won't have any added sugar, but it is just sugar along with some vitamins as well. That's from the fruit. But it's missing that fiber. So, generally, anytime it's some sort of concentrated sugar, whether that be juice or like even if it's adding honey to things or table sugar or honey, or I already said honey, but things like that, if it's a concentrated sugar like a soda, definitely start to look at can we limit those to maybe just having one a day or something like that. So again, sugar doesn't have to be at every meal. Maybe it's once a day. Maybe it's allowing yourself to understand that maybe it doesn't make you feel good every single day. Okay, so let's look at proteins. Proteins are essential for tissue building. So we often think of protein in the sense of muscle recovery and tissue building, but it's also essential for neurological function. So to make a lot of our hormones and things that tell us when we're happy, when we're sad, when it's time to go to bed, a lot of those end up being made by little bits of protein. It's important for immunity, so especially now that we are in COVID times and entering into flu season, if we don't have enough protein, you will find yourself, your immune system is not going to be able to function as well, and it's going to have a harder time um, being able to fight off any sort of germs or pathogens and things like that. And then protein is important for satiety. So satiation, we can think of is that in that moment, I feel done with food. So that's what carbs do, is they make us feel done with food. Satiety helps keep that hunger switch off. So proteins and fats are really important for satiety. They help keep us full in between those meal times or snack times. Sources of protein are going to be meat, poultry, beans, nuts, seeds, and then dairy products. And when you think about how much, if you look at your hand again, I want you to spread your fingers out. So like you're going to try to like give someone a high five or something like that. Spread your fingers out. And if you look at the palm of your hand and the thickness of your palm, that's about 3 ounces. Or if you go up to that first knuckle, that's about 4 ounces, and that's a good serving size. So a lot of times we end up eating too much protein at one time, in the sense of maybe you're eating an 8 ounce steak or a very large chicken breast or something like that. Generally, that's too much, and our body can't actually absorb all of that protein at one time. So it's really smart to look at, can we have smaller portions throughout the day so that we have it at every meal? You still need a protein at every meal so that you can help keep that hunger switch off and so our body can absorb it. But we don't want to mega dose ourselves and give ourselves this very large portion, because our body won't actually be able to absorb it. So right now we have a palm full of protein, 2 to 3 handfuls of carbs. Then we need to look at fats. So fats are somewhat complicated, but they are important for satiety. So again, keeping that hunger switch off. They're very essential for hormone function and nutrient transport. So in the sense of nutrient transport, that means like fat soluble vitamins. That's going to be vitamin D, vitamin A, vitamin E, and vitamin K. When we think of hormones, so cholesterol is a hormone that is made by our liver from fat. So if we don't have any fat, then we're going to probably have really low cholesterol. If we have too much fat, you might have too high cholesterol. Granted, cholesterol is very complicated and can depend on a lot of other genetic factors as well as exercise and things like that and where your fats are coming from. But we need to look at, do you have a fat, and maybe not just and not only fat. So sources of fats are going to be nuts and seeds, avocado, eggs, dairy, oils, and butter. Those are going to be more concentrated fats. And then some meat, so some fattier meats of like beef or pork or even like chicken thighs, and then sauces and dressings. And so generally what I say is you need about 1 or 2 teaspoons of a concentrated fat, which would be oil or butter. Butter is about a tablespoon, and then about 1 to 2 tablespoons of the other. So um, generally for nuts and seeds, if it's about a handful of nuts, that's great, maybe two. If that's your only fat, if it's going to be a nut butter, it's going to be a little bit more concentrated. So generally about 2 tablespoons would be ideal for that. And I generally tell most people to choose 1 or 2 because oftentimes you may cook something in a little bit of oil, but you're not going to scrape all of that oil and eat it. Some of it's going to end up staying in the pan. And then you may top it with something, whether that be some sort of dressing or some sort of um, sauce or something like that, or seeds. So just remember that choosing about 1 or 2 fats per meal is a really great way to start. Okay, and then let's look at fiber. So this is our last one. So fiber is gonna only come from plant food. So there's no fiber in any sort of animal-based food. It is essential for stomach and gut health. So that's the thing that helps keep us regular. It is also important for satiation in a way that it just keeps us full because it adds volume to our stomach. I like to think of fiber as a workout for our stomach. So sometimes if you had too much too quickly, say you go from a place of eating no fruits or vegetables to eating only fruits or vegetables, yeah, we can run into some issues. If you eat a lot of fruits and vegetables and find yourself bloated all the time, then yeah, we can maybe talk about that and just see what works, what doesn't work. Um, it's going to delay your digestion a little bit, and it's also going to decrease absorption of certain things, which is not always a bad thing. So, especially if you are diabetic or have high cholesterol, increasing your fiber content is something that we can do that's going to be really helpful in decreasing how quickly your blood sugar rises or decreasing how much fat you absorb. So some sources are going to be vegetables, so especially non-starchy vegetables. So vegetables that are going to be really high in fiber are going to be a lot of your um, carrots, celery, greens, leafy greens, broccoli, cauliflower, all of that kind of stuff. Yes, there is some fiber in starchy vegetables, as in squash, winter squash, or potatoes, but know that when I think of like fiber, I want to see definitely some sort of green or vegetable on your plate. Other places it will come from is some sort of fruit, beans, and legumes. So beans, lentils, things like that, whole grains, and nuts and seeds. So what I generally recommend is because you're going to get your nuts and seeds possibly in your fat or protein category. Hopefully you're going to get your whole grains from your carb category or your beans or lentils. But then I want to start to look at, okay, how do we start to fit in these vegetables? So what I generally recommend is getting 1 to 2 fruits per day and 2 to 4 handfuls of a vegetable per day of a non-starchy vegetable. So in this realm, this is where a potato wouldn't necessarily count. Potato is going to fit in your carb category. But I generally like to think about having some sort of fiber with every meal or every eating occasion. So I may have a fruit in the morning and for a snack, and then I'm going to have about 2 handfuls of vegetables with lunch and dinner. So therefore, I'm getting my 2 fruits and 4 handfuls of vegetables in my day. Um, Instead of thinking about numbers, if this is something that you absolutely never do, I would just start with eating 1 fruit and then 1 handful of a vegetable, of having a vegetable at dinner. That can be a really good place to start. And when we think about variety, all of the different colors of a fruit or vegetable is going to represent a different nutrient. So basically, you can think of a lot of your fruits and vegetables as a multivitamin in food form. All right, so let's wrap this up. So this is your, I messed up this, but it's your too long did. So I want you to always think of consistency over intensity. So consistency would be doing most of these things of acquiring food, getting enough food of eating 3 meals, maybe a snack or two during the day, eating a variety where, yes, you can maybe have dessert a few times a week when it feels good. Um, when that would help feel like it's serving you. And then we need to start to look at, do we have a balance of these foods? Are you getting a carb, a protein, a fat, and maybe some sort of fruit or vegetable with every meal? And doing that most days, maybe not every day, but maybe most days, as opposed to the intensity of following this very, very, very intricate, difficult diet for a few weeks or a month or something like that, and then falling off the quote unquote wagon and then trying to restart again. So I would rather you do have more consistency and how frequently you're eating vegetables, how frequently you're feeding yourself, and actually taking care of yourself as opposed to the intensity of diets. Because really, when we look at it, no one can maintain these hyper vigilant practices for very long. So if you have any questions about anything that was covered in this, feel free to get connected with me. You can email me at abby@evolvedflg.com, and you can also follow along on any social media as well. So thank you for your time. Hopefully, you gathered that diets are not the way to go. And if we can just start to create these consistent habits over time, that would be the best. And if you are in the Vera and NAPEP group, know that you can come and actually see me and talk about these things a little bit more in depth with me for free. So reach out if you need anything, and thank you for your time.